Hello, and welcome to the Psych Leadership Podcast, the show that helps you understand the psychology of growth, leadership, and making big moves in your life and career. As always, my name's Luke UpChurch, and I'm so happy that you took time out of your day to hang out with me. So, today I want to ask you something that might feel simple on the surface, but I promise you it's not. We're going to dig deep into this one. So, if somebody asked you right now, not in a networking event, not on a first date, just a genuine conversation, somebody asks, "Who are you?" What would you say? Well, for most people, especially early in career, the answer is almost some version of what they do, right? Like I'm a marketing consultant, I'm an IT professional, I'm an intern at a tech company, I'm in operations. We always want to lead with a role. And I've been watching this pattern a long time across hundreds of professionals at every stage. And I want to tell you something and be real crystal clear with this. That reflex is one of the most quietly dangerous things that you can do to your sense of self. Today, what we're talking about is your identity versus your role, who you are versus what you do. And more importantly, what happens when you can't tell the difference. As always, I want to start off with the psychology behind this, the research around this. It helps us frame this and understand why, the why, I should say, behind the patterns, right? So, psychologists distinguish between two components of self: the personal self, that's who you are as an individual, your values, your character, the ways of moving through the world. And then there's the social self. This is the mask that we hold up for everybody else. It's how you identify in groups, roles, organizations. So both of these are real. Both of them matter. The problem begins when social self, particularly your professional version of that social self, starts to eclipse the personal self entirely. So, research calls this over identification with role, and the consequences are well documented and frankly pretty significant. So, there was actually this pretty recent study, it was just back in 2025, in psychology schools examining professional identity and burnout. And it found that when professional identity is rigidly overfused with role performance, individuals lose what researchers call psychological flexibility, the ability to hold their work experience lightly rather than personally. Without that flexibility, every piece of critical feedback isn't information, right? It becomes an attack. Every setback isn't a data point. It becomes a model that we base our self-worth upon. Okay. So I want you to think about that, right? I mean, how many times in your role, especially those of you new in career, somebody gives you feedback on how you're performing as at that role, right? You didn't show up well, your presentation wasn't researched well or something like that. And you take that. I don't know about you, but it hit it, especially when I was new in career. It really hit me at a personal level. It was, you failed, Luke. You screwed up. And does that then impact how you carry yourself in that social entity, right? How do you show up in sorry, not your social, but your individual, right? Your personal self. What do you take home to your family? Okay. So here's a number that should hopefully get your attention. Research cited in 2025, burnout analysis found that Gen Z and millennial workers are hitting peak burnout at just 25 years old. That's a full 17 years earlier than previous generations. And what's one of the most consistent contributors to that? The blurring of the lines between professional identity and personal identity. So when your job is your whole self, the demands of that job become the demands of your whole self, right? That's not sustainable. There's also research from the American Psychology Association back in 2023, so still fairly recent. This was work in the American Survey, and it showed workers ages 18 to 25 are significantly more likely than any other age group to report feeling that their workplace doesn't support them as a full person. 45% of that age group feel unsupported relative to their identity. And that's nearly half the young professionals walking into work every day with this fragile sense of self. heavily dependent on external professional signals to feel stable, stable, I should say. And that's a problem, but it's something that we can fix. So let's talk about this a little bit further. So now that you know the psychology behind it, right? How do we correct it? Well, first, let me tell you a little bit about what I've seen in practice, because I really want to make this concrete for you. The research can feel abstract until you've seen it in person. So at this point in my career, I've been working about 28 years with emerging professionals. At one point, I was an emerging professional. And frankly, in some ways, I still feel like I am. I still see that finish line or that goal that I have in my head, what I'm reaching for. And so, don't take any of what I'm saying today as Luke has it figured out. I don't. I'm struggling with this right now in real time. It's part of the reasons why I brought up the topic in the first place, right? It's something that I'm trying to figure out. But as I've worked with emerging professionals, I develop interns through our nonprofit Rise Up Academics, and I've seen this play out in two very distinct and kind of painful ways. The first is what I would call the collapse pattern. So this is the person that builds their entire sense of self around their performance at work. They show up hard, they care deeply, they tie every piece of personal feedback directly to their worth. And then when something goes sideways, right, like a bad review, a project that doesn't land, maybe a conflict with the boss, they don't just feel professionally rattled, they fall apart personally because there's no separation between what happens at work and who they believe they are. The role and the self are fused. And so when the role takes a hit, so does the self. The second pattern that I see, we'll call this the performance trap. This is the person who gets positive signals from their role, praise, accolades, recognition, and they double down. They work more, they sacrifice more, they orient everything around that performance signal because the performance signals are feeding their self until something interrupts it, right? A restructure, a layoff, a health crisis. And then they're standing in front of you, genuinely not knowing who they are outside of what they did for a living. I've sat across from people in that moment, and it's one of the most disorienting experiences a professional can have. And it's completely preventable. Now, I'll tell you a little, kind of from a personal side here. This specific pattern, this performance trap, is something that I found myself in. Okay. I identified myself in terms of that social self. So some of you may know I've recently struggled with some health issues. And so for the longest time, I was a parent and I was this worker in I'd volunteer for things out in the community, everything from tornado relief to, just things that got me out there, things that got me physical, and things that I was passionate around. I also dealt with, while I was dealing with that health issue, another aspect of it was I was a coach. So I coached soccer from the time that my son was what's called U6, so under 6 years old, all the way up until he was U14. And so when these health issues hit, not only did I couldn't volunteer out in the community. Anything that was physical was off the table. Going out there and coaching soccer. I was teasing my wife at one point. I said, maybe if I get a four-wheeler, like a little golf cart or something, maybe if I get that and a bullhorn, I could still coach. But even the act of walking on uneven ground out on the pitch, out on the soccer field, was just freaking murder on my feet. Okay. So because I identified myself as this coach, as somebody that would, get my hands dirty and be out there in the community, man, it really takes a shot to the ego when suddenly you're not that person. All right. That's actually one of the reasons why I started this podcast. It's one of the reasons why I finished my degree, because I got to this space that I thought, man, everything that I identify around has been stripped away. I have to lean into other things. I have to show my worth or my value in another way. And so when I talk about that performance trap, that's that's very real to me. That's something that I lived in. And frankly, I'm still living in a little bit. Okay? So again, all of this is preventable if we can frame things up right. So there's this line between engagement and over identification. So I don't want you walking away thinking that caring about your work is a problem. It's not. Okay. Engagement is healthy. Commitment is healthy. Being genuinely invested in what you do and wanting to do it well, right? Tapping into that intrinsic motivation, there's something to be said about that. It's a great privilege of a meaningful career. The distinction I'm drawing here is between engagement and over identification. The difference is pretty clear when you get to know what to look for. So engaged professionals they care about their work. They bring their whole selves into it, but they maintain what psychologists would call identity complexity, a rich, multidimensional sense of self that includes relationships, values, interests, and contributions beyond your professional role. So when work goes badly, somebody that's engaged, they're still going to feel that, but they have other anchors, right? They don't spiral because their role is part of who they are, not the sum of the total. Okay. So that's something that I had to learn as an individual, right? When I ran into these health issues, when so many parts of my identity were stripped away, it would have been easy to fall into that self-despair, right? To think that somehow because I couldn't be everything that I once was, that I was something less, that I was, less worthy of success or should maybe be less excited about it. And man, it even impacted my professional engagement. Because at that point, it was like, well, the professional engagement, my day job was something that I did to earn a paycheck, but it wasn't something I was invested in from a passion standpoint. It was, I do this because it pays the bills, and I do these other things because I enjoy them. And so if that's taken away, if I can't do what I enjoy, then all I'm left with is what I have to do. And because I was mentally framing it up that way, that's a tough pill to swallow, right? It's difficult to see those pieces of it. Over identified professionals have collapsed that complexity. The role is identity. And research on identity complexity published in recent years consistently shows that people with greater identity complexity, who see themselves through multiple lenses, they can demonstrate stronger psychological resilience, better stress response, more adaptive behavior when they face setbacks. So the richness of the self is literally a protective factor, right? You narrow your identity, uh, or the more narrow you identify your value, the more vulnerable you are to disruptions, right? If I believe that I'm only a coach, that that's the only thing that I contribute to this world, then when that thing is taken away from me, what do I have left? But if I understand that I'm also a father, that I'm also, that I'm passionate about this project, about Rise Up Academics, about psych leadership, if I can identify as that, then yeah, not being a coach kind of sucks. But could I contribute in other ways? Well, yeah, maybe I could. Hey there. Sorry to interrupt right in the middle of the podcast. I just wanted to say that if you are enjoying this content, I'm going to encourage you to donate to Rise Up Academics. Not only do we create internship and leadership positions, mentoring opportunities for high school and college students, but we also have different conferences that we give, different lessons that we go out and give to the high schools. So if you want to be part of supporting that, click that donate button for me. 100% of the proceeds go straight there. I'm not taking a salary out of any of this. So all of your money goes straight to supporting the students. Thank you. Back to the show. I'm pretty passionate about mentoring. Maybe I could mentor a coach, something like that. Okay. So again, lots of ways that we can lean into this. So what I want you to do here is let's think about how do we actually build this concept. Um, how do you develop a stable sense of self that doesn't depend on what's happening at work? I wanted to give you some practical exercises that I've used with emerging professionals over the years. We're going to call this an identity audit. So, this is how it works. I want you to take out a piece of paper or open a note on your phone, whatever your vibe is, right? I want you to answer these three questions. Answer them without using your job title, your company, your industry, or any professional credentials. Question 1. What what do you value when no one is watching? Not what you think LinkedIn cares about. What actually guides your decisions when there is no audience? Is that fairness? Is it creativity, loyalty, curiosity? Honestly, even when it's costly, or honesty, even when it's costly, rather. So these are character anchors. These are things that don't change when your job does. Okay. So I'll turn this inward. Okay. When I think about what I value when nobody is watching, um, for me, it's my own personal integrity that I do what I say that I'm going to do and I do it to the best of my ability. My mom used to always tell me that, anything you do has your name stamped on it. So take that with pride and carry that weight, right? Of this has my name on it and my name has value in and of itself. So that's where I would land on question 1. Question number 2. What do you do that has nothing to do with your career? This isn't hobbies, not hobbies as a resume line item, actual things that restore you, that engage you, that give you meaning outside of your professional performance. The person who can only answer this question in professional terms has a more narrow identity than they realize. So, what do I do? I'm going to answer, again, turn this inward. What do I do that has nothing to do with my career? Um, that's a tough one. I'd say something that has nothing to do with my direct career. Um, I love to talk to people about their journey. I love to hear where they've gone and just understand the human condition. That gives me energy, um, gives me perspective. So it's just something that I enjoy doing. I love reading your comments in our podcast. So just to give you an easy example there. So question number 3, and again, I hope you're writing these down. What would you be if your job title disappeared tomorrow? And this is a hard one, folks. Not who you would become, who you would still be, what remains, right? So I gave you the example before. I was a coach. Once that's gone, what's left? What do I become? What do I have? Okay. So again, I mean, my title, my day job, I work in cybersecurity. If that was gone, what would I be? I guess I'd still have Rise Up Academics, right? I'd still be a dad. I'd still be somebody that is passionate about psychology, and I'd still be the big nerd that sits down and has I've got a stack of psychology journals on my bookshelf here, and my idea of a rousing Friday night is sitting down and reading and updating my mind on the latest research, right? That's who I would be if my job disappeared. So what about you? Okay, the goal of this identity audit isn't to find some perfect definitive answer. It's to start building the habit of knowing yourself outside of that professional context. Because the professionals who have that, who can walk into a room, lose any job, face any setback, and still know who they are at their core, those are the people who lead with the most consistency, the most resilience, and the most genuine authority. Not because they're untouchable, but because they're grounded. So if you caught the last episode, we talked a lot about that perception gap, the space between how you see yourself and how the room actually experiences you. This episode connects directly. Closing the perception gap requires that you have a stable self to calibrate from, right? If your identity is entirely wrapped in your role, you don't have a fixed point from which to measure. You're reading the room and adjusting. Well, that's not self aware, that's performance. There's a meaningful difference between the two. I want to give you a few real time signals to watch for. Again, because awareness is what helps us to interrupt this pattern. So these are things just to keep in mind as you interact day to day. So the first is disproportionate emotional response to professional feedback. Not just the feeling of disappointment when something doesn't go well, but a response that feels out of scale with the actual event. So if a single piece of criticism sends you into all day self doubt, that's a signal that your self worth is too closely tied to your performance, right? So, an easy example that I see all the time, performance reviews at the end of the year, right? People have this mindset of if I'm not exceptional, then I am somehow less. And I see this in my day job. We have this concept of a person that's performing at full capacity versus exceptional versus partially achieving goals, right? And I've had folks that are marked as that partially achieving goals and they think, well, gosh, I'm such a failure. No, if your boss always told you that you were 100% always achieving every goal, either you are in the wrong place, right? Because you should be probably a level two ahead of where you are. You're clearly not being challenged, right? If you're all the time consistently making every goal, that doesn't sound real. But at the same time, if I'm partially achieving, is that necessarily bad? Right? If I go out and shoot at the free throw line, what are the odds of me shooting 30 shots, 100%, making every single one of them? What about 50? What about 100? What about 365 days? Right? That's tough. Okay. So if you get that professional setback, something that happens to you and you just take it to heart, it screws up your whole day, that's a signal, right? That's a red flag. The second one is being a different being present outside of work or difficulty being present outside of work. So if you find it genuinely hard to turn it off, if weekends are uncomfortable, if you feel this compulsivity to check email, work is the only place that you feel like yourself, that's worth examining, folks. Rest and restoration requires a self that exists outside of the output, outside of what you bring to the office. Okay. So have that separation. The third is the way you introduce yourself. Listen to how you answer, who are you in casual conversations, right? So if somebody is being introduced to you the first time, do you answer with, somebody says, hi, tell me about yourself. And the first thing you say is, well, I do this. That's a red flag. If it's always immediately that professional title, with no other dimension offered, that's a window where you need to identify um, some room for improvement. And folks, I even do this when I join a new team. I like to ask folks, not when I'm interviewing folks that are coming onto my team, when I am coming onto a new team myself, I like to talk about who I am outside of the role. And then I kind of pivot and say, this is who I am, and then in my day job, I do XYZ things. And having that distinction and that separation helps to keep me grounded. And it's not a skill that I've always had. It's one that I am actively working on developing as as I'm talking to you right now. Okay? So none of these are condemning signals. They're just data. And the response isn't stopping you from caring about work. It's to intentionally invest in the other parts of yourself so that when work shifts, as it's going to, right, you have somewhere else to stand. All right. So here's what I want you to walk away with today, folks. I think we've carried this about as far as we can. I want you to go back and listen to that identity audit. Answer those three questions without your professional credentials. And if those answers feel thin, that's not a failure. That's an invitation. It's an invitation to build something in yourself that no restructure, no layoff, no bad review can ever take away. Okay. Thanks for being here and listening to this. Share this with somebody in the grind who needs to hear it. I'll talk to you next time. Have a great day. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the podcast. Thanks so much for your time today. If you like this content, I'm going to ask that you consider a small donation. Every little bit helps, but this allows us to continue not only doing the podcast, but actually offering the internship positions, the leadership conferences, as well as the in person courses that we deliver to high school and college students. Think about hitting the donation button for me. And again, we'll talk soon. Bye bye.